Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm here with my co-host, Zach Gerber, and my new friend who is running for the board of the United Conservative Party of Alberta, Ray Strom. Wade, welcome back to the show. Not welcome back to the show. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the political show as you're entering the arena yet again in your life. So do you want to share a little bit with the listeners about who you are, why you're doing this, and what all this means to you, what's been happening in the world?
Sure, David. And it's wonderful to be able to get together with you again on this occasion. We've crossed paths quite a number of times, and it's always a pleasure hearing from your side of the story as well. What motivated you to get actively involved in your various endeavors? You've taken such an exceptional effort. You made such an effort to become a part of the Canadian landscape, if you like. And, there's so many Canadians who have done that, as we talked a little bit about that earlier, just on the quiet, but contributing so much to what we're doing. And, I look back at my own life and I see so many situations that contributed to what I'm doing today, really building on the foundations that others laid, building on their principles, on their character, and all of those kinds of things. And it's crossed a multitude of platforms, if you like.
What would be some good examples? What would be some good examples of some of those people that have given you, like, we like to do little vignettes on the Canadian Story. So, for example, I often share about, mentors who came along and gave me a hand on my journey. Who would be someone in your life that, helped you get to the point where you can take this role of service for others?
I really start out with my family. That has been such an essential part of what I've become. And to this day, all of my siblings really contribute to that greatly. But I go back to being raised on the farm. I'd learned at a very early age I didn't want to be a farmer, which my father wasn't probably too happy about. But I have to say that my father and my mother instilled principles into my character that trustfully have lasted to this day. They are, those basic principles of honesty, forthrightness, trustworthiness, all those kinds of things that are fundamental to good character that I think is so essential for what we become.
How did they instill those values in you? Like, how did they teach you those lessons and those virtues?
Part of it was we were part of a family. There was always expectations being part of a big family. I come from a family of 7. So, you didn't, there was no time for laziness, if you like. There was always something to do, chores to do, cows to feed, milk, gardens to tend, all those sorts of things. So there was an expectation within the family that you certainly did your part. You couldn't expect somebody else to pick up the pieces when you let down on your responsibilities. So those were the sorts of things. And part of that whole thing was my faith journey. Church was an exceptional part of our lives, not just on Sundays. It was expected that was a part of our life every day of the week. And so the principles that we were taught from a biblical perspective were so essential to my upbringing and still is to this day. And it's led to some rather interesting things, I think, as we start looking at some of the things I've been involved in. Just not being bored at all. There was no time for boredom, by the way, on the farm. We had a lot of land. We had a large herd of cattle, horses, and those kinds of things. So there was an expectation that we were really involved in everything that we were doing. The other part of growing up, which is so impactful to me, was the community that we grew up in. I went to public school, but interestingly, many of the teachers and the principals and whatnot actually came from our own community. So it was like my extended family, which was really quite amazing in a lot of ways. Those individuals who were my teachers at that time are still friends to this day, the ones that, continue on. And so these are really impactful things. The other thing is that my classmates who I grew up with were like family as well. It's quite amazing, to go now what I call back home, which is in southern Alberta.
Yeah, so what area of southern Alberta are you from, for the people who don't know?
The Burdett Bow Island area, which is just west of Medicine Hat. And very active community, unbelievable in terms of their entrepreneurial spirit, by the way. First pivot sprinkler in Canada, if you can believe it. Those farmers were always trying something different, growing unbelievable, unusual crops. They weren't afraid to try something different. And of course, that required that people, persist as a community. And, that really led to, I think, a different kind of perspective that each of us had growing up in that community. Like I say, I go home to that community, and invariably we're going out to, some of my acquaintances' facilities, their homes, getting together with them, reminiscing about old times, and then thinking about where are we at today? And is there something that we can change to make it better? This was always a part of the exciting part of going home, was expectations for what we could do better. Always. It was always a part of our community.
I like that. And what do you think fostered that desire to do things better, to improve on, not to destroy what we had, but to take what we had and make it a little bit better? What do you think was the impetus behind that? What was the reason for that?
Oh, there were always expectations of excellence in the community itself. And the other part of it was holding one another to account for what we did. That really came from, I think, the early community that was established there at the turn of the 20th century, when, individuals who were settlers in the area had to get together. They had to work with one another, and your success really depended on how you interacted with others in the community. By the way, there was no police force in that community. They were their own police force. And I can assure you that people who stepped out of line were dealt with. Not to the extreme, but there was certainly an expectation of what you were to be doing within the community and what your behaviors were to be. These are the kinds of things.
So you come from this community, but you decided you didn't want to be into farming. So where did you go? What direction did you take?
Well, I wound up coming to Calgary and going to the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, enrolled in the chemistry department for a 2-year program. And once I graduated from that program, I was offered a position in the department, and which I took, and I worked there for almost 10 years. And I'll tell you, that environment in that facility was second to none. I rate or rank the library at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology probably only second to Ryerson in Toronto. Just an exceptional library. I learned as much as I could reading. If I had any spare time, I was in the library reading all kinds of technical material. The other part of that were the individuals who were part of the Institute in the technical area. 2 individuals I'll outline here. One in the electrical or in the electronics department. He was head of the repair division there, had about a half a dozen technicians working with him. He was unbelievable. He was the kind of guy, he was held on retainers by the Canadian government to make sure that transmitters and receivers in the far north were kept operational. So he would get a phone call sometimes in the middle of the night, the transmitter's down. And so he would get just a very sketchy description as to what was wrong with that, what had gone down with that system. He would pack his bags, get on a flight to say Tuktoyaktuk, and a lot of people don't even know where that is.
It's very far up there for those who don't know. That's like right by the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, so he would get on that flight, fly up there, and repair the transmitter. I mean, how many people can do that? The other individual was in the math physics department in the technical area, and he was interesting. Originally came from South Africa, was a ham radio operator as well as being a very technical person. But he built out of chicken wire and a frame receiver for getting the NOAA images as a satellite passed over Western Canada. He built his own receiver and recorder, and then every afternoon he would print out on a special machine that he had constructed himself a lithographic print, which he then would take down to CBC, who would then televise it every night. It was the first weather satellite photos ever produced in Canada.
Wow, we're here in Alberta.
In Alberta. So these are the kinds of people that I had, exceptional exposure to over early parts of my career. Later on, when I joined Amoco Canada Petroleum Company in 1980, I was exposed again to some of the very best. I mean, the very best, and had opportunity to travel to the U.S. Basically to work with our technical people there. And again, cream of the crop individuals, both from a technical sense and personality wise. I've been exceptionally blessed. So when I make the statement, follow your God-given passions and then be prepared to hang on for the ride of your life, I mean exactly what I say.
Right, because you've
been my entire career.
Many different journeys from a career perspective and
Absolutely.
and so have you found that what's been the most interesting part of the people you've met on the journey? Like what has stood out to you about all of these incredible minds? What would you, if you were giving advice to people who are trying to better their own life, what would you say these minds all had in common, or the way that they lived their life was the same?
They were all people of character, every single
Mm,
one of them. And you know, as an individual, you have a choice. I think it's Glenn Beck who made the statement, "Show me your friends, I'll show you your future." It's absolutely true. It's who you hang out with that shapes your life. At the same time, maybe a little bit of you is rubbing off on them as well. And so these are the kinds of people that I chose to hang out with, spend a lot of time with, both professionally and socially. And, a lot of that rubbed off on, I think, me. So, in addition to everything that led up to that in terms of family life, which, is so important to me as well.
so in your mind, what is character? Like, how would you define character? Because I agree with you, but I think for a lot of people, we don't even talk about what those words mean anymore.
Yeah, character is really, I think, some very fundamental things. Honesty, trustworthiness, keeping your word. Those are the kinds of things that are diligence, persistence, all those kinds of things that make up your character.
So let me try to formulate this question correctly. So you credited the building of your own character to two things: your family and your community. You had a strong family and a strong community. Um, are you concerned looking at the younger generations in Canada now? So my observations are um, less people want to get married, less people stay married, and community really isn't more than a small group of friends, if that. More people are online more of the time. They spend less time in the room with other people. Are you concerned looking at the young people in Canada about their family and their community values, and in turn, what that might do to their character?
I sure am. I think it's a growing problem. Is that everybody seems to be wrapped up in their smartphones and different games they're doing. There's becoming a disconnectedness between people, and I actually see there's a bit of hope for that. I think, in that sports activities which get people together, church activities get people together, and now looking at what we're involved in the kind of the political scene, we're looking at getting together with a lot of people, interacting with them, exchanging ideas. These are exceptionally critical in terms of forming a good cultural and social fabric, which in the past for Canada has been such an important piece of our being as a Canadian people. And by the way, that this culture that we had established, and even though it's deteriorated to some degree, is known worldwide. I don't think Canadians really understand that unless they've traveled, not just as tourists, but even in professional circles. They don't understand the impact that Canada has had on the rest of the world.
What do you think that impact is?
It's a recognition, number one, that Canada stands out as a peaceful nation. It still has that flavor when you go elsewhere. The other part of it is that we have developed levels of expertise in our institutions, even in our social structure. The expertise is there that people recognize. For example, I went to Kenya in 2018 as a result of winning a bid, which was a global situation. We were competing with some of the best other lab operations in the world. And one of the things that we were told by the individuals who were actually evaluating kind of the process of the bid, not the actual individuals who were making the determination of the bid, but individuals who were helping us go through that process, that as Canadians, we had what they called an unfair advantage. And it wasn't just Canadians, it was Albertans who exhibited that unfair advantage. We sometimes
what was that advantage? Did they say what they thought that advantage was, or?
Maybe I can give you an example of just what that looked like when we were in Kenya.
Yes.
We had been told about some of the other contracts that had been let by the Kenyan government, and other countries came in, other organizations came in, did their presentations, they left. They came back with the results of their discoveries as to what needed to be done, dropped the bill, and left. It was, Canadians aren't like that. We're social creatures. So as part of what we did, and by the way, my colleague was an individual from Australia living in Kuwait. Just an exceptional gem of a guy. Much the same character as a Canadian, right?
Yes.
So we got along just famously. It's like even within a few days, we were thinking on the same page, which is just exceptional. But one of the things that we did was get to know the people that we were working with. And we spent a lot of time with those individuals, getting to know what they were like, so that we didn't have to second guess whether we were making the right decisions or, dealing with their particular expectations for what they had for us. And we also spent time working with government officials at the highest levels, by the way. And they just said, "This is exceptional. Why you didn't have to do this?" And we said we wanted to find out exactly what was expected of us, what the Kenyan people wanted, what their expectations were, and move on from there. You can't really deliver what is expected if you don't get to know the people that you're working with. And I'll tell you, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience for me personally to work with the Kenyan people. I wish that we could do more for them, and maybe we'll have a chance to do that.
What exactly was the nature of your work in Kenya?
We were rebuilding the geological laboratory for the Kenyan Oil Company, which is their national oil company. And so we had to know exactly what kind of technical requirements there were, but also look at what was expected in terms of training personnel to work within that lab facility. Fortunately, they in a previous operation of that lab, which they had shut down some almost 10 years earlier, there were still personnel around, which we got to work with as well, basically to interact with them, understanding what their capabilities were and see what we had to do in terms of training and those sorts of things. So it was a really good
Basically, you were building
experience.
out their geological understanding of helping them build out a lab that could help them better articulate their geological understanding of their environment, right?
Exactly. That's
Yes,
exactly
yes.
right. Yeah.
And so when you were there and you're doing this, what was one of the things you noticed about there versus here that made you appreciate the culture we've built perhaps as well and understanding? I've actually spent some time in Kenya myself, only 3 weeks, not nearly as much time as you, but I found it was amazing because they had such a long and deep history and understanding of themselves. Whereas in Alberta, particularly in Canada in general, we're so young and new. We don't have ancient traditions to the same degree, right? We don't have
exactly
the same connection to things as they do there. And yet we do have this sense of kind of this entrepreneurial bent that seems almost unique. Like they even said over there that we had an unfair advantage, not just as you pointed out, because of how personable Canadians and Albertans can be, but also because of the way we think as Albertans. And I mean, that's a big part of what you're heading into right now as you're running to be the policy director for the whole province, basically the party that is in government right now. What was it that you came to appreciate about Alberta and who we are and how we do things here?
Oh, I think it goes back to the interactions that I've had for many decades with people that I worked with. And by the way, that wasn't just on a professional level or a technical level here either, because of some of the things that I've been involved with on the side, which includes things like establishing home education here in Alberta, helping to establish some of the laws, the policies, regulations, working constantly with government. I had to, I guess, really come to the point where it was a necessity to work with people. Now, you have a choice. You can work confrontationally, or you can work alongside people. And you don't always have to agree, by the way. But, in principle, you are working with people and trying to come to positions of understanding. That requires good communication skills and helping the others to understand how something that you might be thinking could in fact benefit them. And so I'm always looking for things that will help us, particularly within the UCP, how the actions that we take will benefit the party, will more importantly benefit our membership. We always need to keep that in mind. And from my perspective, it's far less important to try to satisfy the requirements of the premier or ministers or MLAs. My focus is on membership. The working individual, who is just part of the everyday life on
the community, like you were pointing out, right?
It's community.
The people who make up the community. I think a lot of people don't understand this. They don't understand that a political party is really just a lot of relationships between thousands of different volunteers. Like, how many political campaigns have you been on at this point? I imagine quite a few. How many volunteer hours have you given to your community, whether it's through your church or other things? Why don't you share a little bit about how that's enriched your life? I'm sure this is a volunteer position you're running for, right? It's not, it's volunteer. So why do you care about volunteerism so much? Why do you want to help people?
It's just part of my makeup. But I think the responsibilities that you acquire or assume as an individual, even during your youth, and being part of a community, there's a lot of satisfaction in helping other people and getting help from other people. And so it's a two-way street, in my view. Any kind of operation that you're part of, whether it be work, your community activities that you might be involved in, your church community, those kinds of things, special interest groups like home education here in Alberta and across the nation, which I'm currently part of. It's helping people. People helping people, as the phrase goes. Great deal of satisfaction in seeing other people succeed. There's there's benefits for everybody when everybody succeeds. And that means you're not climbing on top of somebody else to get to the top. You're working alongside other people to make them successful. It kind of follows that old European tradition of, the enterprise, basically where you had, a master craftsman
And an apprentice,
who was teaching the apprentice. And what happens? What happens when the apprentice becomes better than the master? That's to the credit of the master.
Yes, it means he
And
taught him well.
I think we need to shift our thinking about how we think about all these things. If somebody can vault over you, all the better. Absolutely all the better.
Yeah, I like that. I actually try to apply that policy in my own life with many of my my students that I teach the art of political organizing. Some of them have surpassed me. One of them was very helpful in Danielle Smith's campaign. Actually, a few of them were. And I'm always so impressed with when I think there's a student-teacher relationship that when you see your student do well, you feel a sense of accomplishment that we've lost in this hyper-competitive, hyper-consumeristic world where, like you described, everyone's on their cell phones. They're all looking at what's going on in other people's lives, and they're competing with them instead of being with them, instead of enjoying with them, instead of appreciating them.
Oh, exactly. And, that actually the friendships that develop out of that are exceptional. In working alongside a number of my instructors at SAIT when I graduated from there, they were inputting into my life unbelievably. And over time, we became fast friends. Those relationships are hard to describe. The bonds that you establish with people working together.
I want to go into that. And Zach, I want you to talk about it a little bit in terms of hunting. You're about to go on this big hunting trip. And I'm sure the listeners like to hear your hunting stories, we know. So you bond with your brothers going on these hunting trips. Ray's bonded with his teachers and then become a teacher and educated others and how he does it. What do you guys think it is about these things that we do that bonds us as humans? When we do something with other people, we bond with them much more deeply than even just talking.
Yeah, I think I haven't really thought about this particular question before. But if I were to grasp at an answer off the cuff, I think that it is you are I think it is unavoidable to bond with people that you go through hardship with. Not to say that this particular hunting trip is going to be, well, we'll call it controlled hardship. It's going to be cold. It might
like
rain
that.
on us. No, there's no absolute like threat, or we're not fearing for our lives, not that kind of hardship. But the three of us who are going are agreeing to go out into the wilderness in tents and to chase animals around probably frozen landscape for 5 days. And again, I haven't really thought about this, but the people that you choose to do difficult things with, you're going to inevitably bond with, I think. And the guy I'm going out with, one of the guys I'm going out with, his name's Ian Blackwood. You can actually go back and listen to his episode on our podcast. We talk a lot about hunting. We're talking about community and mentorship. He has been a mentor of mine for, it would be well over a decade now, probably coming up on 15 years. He was really the guy who broke me into my career as an audio technician. And he was the guy who gave me the opportunity to go out on tour with Walk Off the Earth, one of the bands that I tour with. And we've gone through 26, 27 countries together, something like that. And
Wow.
and he was there every step of the way. And now he's mentored me in hunting. And
That's true. He just keeps mentoring you.
This dude just keeps teaching me stuff. And it's one of the most incredible relationships I have in my life. And he watched me grow. He watched me struggle with things. He always had a good word when I didn't know what to do. And now we kind of get to tackle this new thing together, because neither of us have been on a trip like this. And
you've been brought into, you're not in the mentorship role anymore. Now you're the comrade, the brother in arms.
Yeah, in a sense.
Describing.
I mean, he's a decade ahead of me, and he'll always probably know better. But yeah, we're taking this one on together, and I really hope that we come home next week, and the two other guys come on the podcast, and we have a great story about how we bagged the moose. I really hope so.
Yes.
But yeah.
Great. So, like, what's an example like what Zach just shared of someone that did that for you?
Oh, the bonding aspect is just something that, it doesn't matter what organization you're with, or you're even in school, going through SAIT. There was one particular instructor in our chemistry department. He was younger, but just a brilliant guy. And he and I bonded very, very quickly, to the point that it was almost not like an instructor-student relationship. What he was looking for in at least some of his students, those that he had high expectations for, was, capacity, dedication, and a number of other qualities I won't get into, but he had expectations for that. And when he saw his students performing within his expectations, he started putting out exceptionally a lot more than he would have for the average student. It wasn't favoritism, but he recognized abilities in people, and he kind of took them under his wing and moved them forward. Gave them projects. I remember one project we got. I think I might have been the only one who got end product out of this particular lab. That was the level of difficulty. But those were the sorts of things that he would throw at his students. And, what if you were able to perform, he would go the extra mile, definitely, to make sure that you succeeded. He was an exceptionally good master to me being the apprentice.
Mm. On the topic of education, I think twice in this conversation you've mentioned home education. What are your thoughts around home education? You know, I was homeschooled myself. David was homeschooled. It's interesting that you bring that up. What are your viewpoints on it?
I think it offers an exceptional alternative to public education or private education. I would say that it's not for everybody. There's a level of commitment required by the parents, for example, that quite frankly, not everybody is prepared to do, or nor do they maybe have the capacity to do it. It's very, very difficult in today's world with, both parents working and those kinds of things. So, there may be circumstances that extenuating circumstances that limit the capacity for parents to do that. But where parents are dedicated and persistent, the results can be just exceptional. And even in cases where children perhaps down the road think, I would like to have gone to public school, etc. All of a sudden, they turn up as a David Parker or as a Zach, right?
Well, why?
And
Thank
here
you.
we go. What do you say? What do you say?
I feel all buttered up.
Right?
So, what about community? One of the popular counter arguments against home education is community and socialization. How do home educated children integrate themselves effectively into a community? Because that's important too.
Yeah, I love that. It was kind of the standard question when we first started into this. Well, what about socialization? Well, as it turns out, you guys are living examples of what socialization does within the home education context. It produces citizens. I mean, this is kind of a general rule, but it's backed up by technical educational studies, by the way. National Home Education Research Institute in the U.S., headed up by Dr. Brian Ray, has studied this extensively in both the U.S. and Canada. And the results are rather exceptional in that not only is socialization a big factor while they are engaged in home education, there are so many different activities that are done as a group in combined settings with not just your peers, by the way, but also with other age brackets that you normally might not be mixing with in the public arena. But what has shown up consistently is that home educated students, generally speaking, there are exceptions, of course, but generally speaking, wind up contributing to society on an exceptional basis when they become young adults. And it's all part of the training that we go through. And what happens to individuals who are brought up as responsible citizens, they come to take that responsibility really to heart. And so it's not surprising to me at all that I see a lot of young people who are engaging in political action, whatever form that might be, taking part in their communities, becoming exceptional employees that have been brought up within the home education community. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting you say they're more they take to heart the concerns of the community more not less. Would that be fair? Did I get that correctly?
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is funny, and it's kind of the antithesis of what you might anticipate, because the argument is that the home educated individual would have spent less time in the community, not more. What do you think drives the motivation, the observed, I guess, motivation of community engagement for those kids who weren't necessarily as plugged into the community as someone who would be in the public education system?
What kind of community are you engaged in, I think, is the question that needs to be asked. And as I pointed out, many home educating families are not isolated, by the way. They are so engaged. Most of the home educating families that I know of, and I know hundreds, if not thousands of them, are so engaged in activities that there's hardly any spare time, if you like. Basically, they're going to sporting events, they're social events that are organized among the home education community, all those kinds of things. So that the social interaction is really extended within the community, not attenuated as most people would think it might be. It's one of those obstacles that we faced from the highest professional levels within the Department of Education, et cetera, here in Alberta. You know, how are you people going to fit into society down the road? Well, you don't seem to understand how this, we were actually called a subculture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
So,
well, when Zach and I were growing up, we were definitely the weird kids. Wouldn't you say, Zach? Like we weren't considered normal.
Yeah, it was definitely weird to be homeschooled. I think it's a little bit more accepted now.
It is.
And I would like to credit David, your mom, and my mom for taking that step out, because they believed in what they might be able to impart by doing that. Because that would have been a very brave move for them, and they would have faced the brunt of that criticism. I mean, I faced a little of it from young kids who didn't know any better, but they would have faced it on a much more sophisticated scale than we did. And
Yeah,
I just want to credit them for making that decision, because that's not an easy decision to make anytime you step outside of the norm. As we've all.
Yeah, and I guess I would credit my mom in a lot of ways with that, being the homeschool facilitator, the one who was kind of pushing forward on that, and still does that all across this province, has for decades now. So
she's still doing that, is she?
She's still doing it right now. I think she's still got 90 families that she visits and makes sure they're learning and helps them educate their children, helps parents educate their own children. I mean, from my experience, and I always say that I'm blinded to certain understandings of education because I've only had one, but from my understanding of it, the homeschool people I know tend to be some of the most interesting people. I mean, Graham Wardle, who was recently on the Sovereignty Tour with me here in Alberta and from Heartland, the television show, he was also homeschooled and went through all that too. It's a lot of exceptional people come through homeschooling, and I think it's definitely it should be a highly valued education option. It also costs the government the least of any education.
Oh, absolutely.
By a highway mile, right?
But it gives them the least control.
you know,
can't have that. Isn't that the truth?
We can't have that.
That is what you're always up against. You know, and we've had this right from day one, where the authorities, whether it be people within the Department of Education, Alberta Ed, they always seem to want to gain more control over what you were doing. It was never adequate to say parents are the primary educators to their children. So there's always this kind of conflict, if you like, between ideologies. the professional educators saying, we know what's best for your children. In fact, back in the 1980s, this was part of Alberta Report, reporting on a University of Calgary professor stating, we own your children. So that's what we were fighting at those times, in early 1980s, I was very involved in terms of challenging what was going on in public education. I went to forums, I attended all kinds of government meetings, and was actively involved in those organizations that were working to try and better what was going on in Alberta and getting recognition for parental input. Even within the public system, it was like you were beating your head against a wall, trying to get some recognition of parents. That was just
wild.
Do you feel like it's gotten? This is something I think I gather that you've been observing for a while. Do you think the situation has gotten worse? I feel like even in my short lifetime, I have watched the public education system get worse. And it seems to be getting worse rapidly. Is that
very rapidly?
Do you echo that sentiment?
Absolutely. There seemed to be a time in the 80s when professional educators were trying to garner more and more control over what children were learning. And it seemed like during the 90s, that kind of relaxed. But now it's been, in my view, intensified to the point where parents don't seem to have much of any input into what their children are learning. And parents, I think, were kind of presuming that their children were learning the fundamentals of education, going back to the so-called 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But now we're into a stage where all these kinds of social situations are impacting children, and parents don't seem to be all that aware as to what's been happening, what has happened over a period of maybe 1 or 2 decades. So I would agree with you, Zach, on that, because what we've seen happen within the last few years is, in my view, quite alarming.
What do you think the solution?
Parents are recognizing that.
What do you think the solution is? Is it that enough parents need to go, okay, enough of that, and pull their children from the schooling system? Like, does that fix it? Does that send a clear enough message, or does there need to be a different type of reform?
It's actually multi-pronged, in my view. Not every parent can just go and pull their kids from the school. That's one option, and move toward home education or look at private education, tutoring, those sorts of things. But parents need to be far more actively engaged in the processes that make up schooling itself, whether it be public or private. Parents cannot be expecting that someone else has their children's best interest at heart. That's a very dangerous presupposition. I'll just say that. Mm-hmm. It's very necessary for parents to be actively involved in all of the process, to greater or lesser degrees, but they really do need to be aware.
Right. We are running down on just a few minutes here left. I want to ask you a question that I love asking people who are generations ahead of me. So I'm a millennial. I just turned 30 years old. From your perspective, thank you. I appreciate that. From your perspective, as someone who is a few decades ahead of me, what is the low-hanging fruit for for my generation? What is something that we don't see that we ought to see that you do?
I will say that one of the things that I value about, individuals of your generation, and it may be easy to spot, but it's enthusiasm. Young people who get their lights turned on, I would say, they're explosive. They are unstoppable. That couldn't be said for my generation in many ways. But I see so many young people now. My company, for example, I made a point of having young people work in my company, and I had constant comments by people all through the oil and gas industry. Your people are so young. I said, I love working with young people. I absolutely love it. There's an aspect of mentorship to help people realize their potential. And I know that's kind of a crazy phraseology that went around a while back, but it's true. Every young person has a potential to be something very exceptional. And sometimes it only takes a little bit of a spark to make them realize, I can do this. I can do this. And that's when you see that enthusiasm that I get excited. And I see that constantly with young people that I interact with.
I like that. So embrace the enthusiasm, because that's a superpower the young don't even know they have, is that you get excited about things, that you can
absolutely
truly push towards things. Well,
yes.
I've really enjoyed this, Ray. I hope you did too. I'm glad you came on the show. And I like getting the Canadian story from every angle. And we have a lot of the Alberta story here because I'm Albertan and Zach loves Alberta, and a lot of our values are represented here. But thank you for also.
We're just a bunch of patriots.
Yeah,
you guys really are, man.
Yes.
This podcast. I'm gonna say it. This podcast has made me embarrassed to live in Ontario. I vibe with them Albertans. I really do.
Possible.
I didn't know what I didn't know until I knew that I didn't know it, and now I know it.
Come on out.
Yeah, come on out.
I could tell you some amazing stories from the past. My dad's generation about, Canadian coordination, even things like Newfoundland. Newfoundlanders, before they joined Canada, being so compassionate and caring about the rest of Canada. Just amazing stories.
There's a lot. Well, we want to tell as many of them as we can on here, but we do have to go because we keep it down to an hour. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's the CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.